Thank you to everybody for joining. We'll go ahead and get started. It's 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. My name is Sarah Polano. I am a Senior Account Manager with Getting Hired and will also be your moderator for today's session, Building a Business Case for Internships for Individuals with Learning Disabilities, presented by our partner, BroadFutures. Today's session is scheduled for 1 hour from 12 to 1, and we are recording the session and we'll send out a link to that recording instead of sending the presentation deck. Please feel free to ask questions or provide comments through the chat box or the Q&A feature in WebEx at any time. There should be a drop down for you to access this. Those questions or comments will come directly to me and we will follow up with you after the webinar if we aren't able to get to it during the presentation. Everyone's line is automatically placed on mute, so again, please feel free to use this chat feature. And live captioning is being provided, and I will send the link to that through the chat feature, and I did also email it to all registrants ahead of time as well. Today's presentation is presented by Carolyn Jeppsen, President and co-founder of BroadFutures. BroadFutures was founded in 2013. And Carolyn is responsible for the overall management and operations of BroadFutures' strategic vision, fundraising, and program creation and implementation. She has devoted over 15 years serving on boards that serve individuals with disabilities. So a lot of expertise. Please feel free to take advantage of that knowledge and ask any questions. And she is also a civil litigator by background who left her career as a lawyer to start BroadFutures. She's the proud parent of a daughter with multiple disabilities and is part of the reason why she is so passionate about this topic and about this population. So at this time, Carolyn, I will turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Getting Hired, for having me. What I'd like to do is go through this presentation, and I really want to leave some time for anyone who has questions. Because I think that'll be helpful for everyone. So please feel free to ask questions. I want to start out by just talking about who is BroadFutures. So we are an internship program. That's why I'm pretty passionate about this issue that I'm speaking on today. We feel that we're actually revolutionizing the way young people with disabilities enter the workforce. At this time, we are the only paid internship program in the U.S. for young people who have learning and related disabilities. We don't just throw people into internships, we also embed training and mentoring. And the overarching themes are that we want to make sure that we're providing equal opportunity, access, and support for the young people that we serve so that they have the same opportunities as their typically developing peers. And in return, we're providing employers with a vetted, prepared, and highly motivated source of talent. We serve young people between the ages of 18 and 26. They have high school diplomas. Most of them are headed to college or in college. They must have a documented learning disability or ADHD. We also have a subset within that group who has an autism diagnosis, and most young people also have some sort of anxiety as well. We've partnered with over 50 employers in the Washington, D.C. area and growing. So I wanted to go over the agenda for today. We're first going to talk about understanding the population. I am speaking with you all today about internships for those folks who have non-apparent disabilities. A lot of this would apply to people who have other disabilities, but that's the population we're focusing on. Then we're going to talk about, why internship programs, what's the value of it. Most importantly, tips to have an successful internship program, and then what are the potential challenges and solutions. You guys may or may not know that I'm not aware of who actually has an embedded internship program already, so I'm going to be speaking generally to everyone, those of you who have them and want to expand them, and those of you who do not yet have an internship program. So we're going to start off by actually talking about the young people that we are trying to serve. I want to explain that some of these slides are going to look very simple, very visual, and that's by design. That's how we present. A big part of how you accommodate people who think differently is to present in multimodal ways. And so this is just an example of that. 1 in 5 individuals in the United States has a learning disability, so 20% of our population. However, less than half, about 41%, actually finish post-secondary education. This is not usually due to cognitive abilities. It's due to lack of access and support. We see the same rates, a little bit higher, but same rates for employment of working age adults with learning disabilities. Yet we are absolutely aware of the fact that as you guys probably know, that staffing is a huge problem right now. It's business's #1 problem. We also know estimated, these are all estimates, of by 2030, we're going to see over 85 million people talent shortage. We also importantly know there are great estimates on what the spending power is of the market segment of individuals with disabilities. So one thing to think about is this is not only an important proposition for those within your organization, but it's an important proposition for those that you serve. So 87% of consumers say they actually prefer to do business with companies that employ individuals with disabilities. So now I really want to just get to the heart of why we have the internship programs. I've done a lot of work around millennials and what their work patterns are, and I want to mesh that with what we're talking about today. So we know that sourcing talent is changing, right? It's estimated that young workers are going to have about 30 to 40 jobs before they retire. It's very different than when I was coming up, where you just kind of prove yourself in 1 or 2 jobs and move forward. 91% of millennials expect to stay in a job for less than 3 years. So in order to navigate what is clearly a more transient job market, on the talent end, the young people really need to be exposed to different work environments. Through that exposure, it's going to lead to better results for the working environment. So internships are a huge part of how the younger generation is experiencing education and experiencing the workplace. It's often where they're actually learning about their careers and their first experience with careers. And it's where, as much as employers are testing out interns at this point, interns are also testing employers at this point. So I've really just kind of laid out for you what the top reasons are for having an internship program. There are many reasons, but I didn't want to overwhelm everyone, and I kind of wanted to focus on, where we see the main reasons. So obviously the first reason is that it's a great way to recruit talent and motivated employees. It also provides opportunities to real-time audition future talent and reduce recruitment and training costs. This is what we see increasingly, although BroadFutures is just an internship program, we increasingly see people using our resource as a way to vet talent. We also know that interns can actually bring fresh and innovative solutions or perspective as long as you create an environment where they have an opportunity to do so. It allows them to explore different fields, gain experience, and increase their flexibility. And why is that important for the employer? That's important for the employer because if they have exposure to that, they're actually going to be a better part of your labor force when they're working for you. It helps to create a labor force, as we just said, who's actually got the critical skills and flexibility, but problem solving, conflict resolution, the ability to communicate, and the ability to work with a team. Finally, it allows the employer, if you have a robust internship program for young people with disabilities, it allows you as an employer to really advance your reputation, both in your immediate community and larger communities, that you are leaders, both in educating, because that's obviously part of an internship experience, but also providing great jobs for young people. I also want to add that this is also a place, if you are having difficulty actually recruiting talent with disabilities, internship programs are a great way to let the market know that you're disability friendly. So what is the value proposition? I put this one up because I think it says it best, but we all know that when we include people with disabilities on our teams and in business, we actually do better. We create more innovative solutions, more accessible products. We have a competitive advantage. It's going to allow us to attract diverse customers and a diverse talent base. I mean, if we think about innovation and we think about what are some of the innovations that come out of people with disabilities, we often find that it's because they're thinking differently. And we'll talk about some examples of that later on. This EQ versus IQ is kind of a hot button issue right now. Actually, right as I was getting ready to get on this webinar, I got an email about EQ and training the trainer. I want to, in case anyone doesn't know what that is, EQ is the idea of emotional intelligence. We have a heart here in the person's head, meaning kind of the soft skills and person skills, whereas IQ is going to the raw cognitive talent. And so the workforce is changing pretty dramatically as we look forward. Google's been pretty out front, even an organization that we think is very focused on the IQ part. They're looking much more at the EQ part because we know that the skills needed going forward are going to be a lot more about your ability to navigate socially and navigate communication-wise in the workforce. Some people call these soft skills. Recently, they're being called power skills because they are a skill that will endure as you move forward. So internship opportunities allow young people to really practice those EQ skills in a real-time situation, which then is going to translate to what you guys are looking for in the workforce. So we also know that successful early work-based learning changes outcomes both on the education realm and employment. And this is particularly true for individuals with disabilities. The research on this has been going on for a couple decades, and so you know by engaging in internship programs, we're helping to drive these more important outcomes. So this is a bleak slide because I want to get everyone's attention. When I'm on the end of actually recruiting employers and helping employers to understand why do we want to have an internship program, I often run up against the idea that, well, we've never had an internship program. We've always done it that way, right? So as someone who I think tries to look at things innovatively, I think those are the 7 most expensive words in business because your competitors, if you're saying that, are already into this and doing the internship programs and thinking of different ways to recruit talent. So I want us to think about this in a different way and to think about it outside the box. So let's talk about, let's say I've sold you on the idea that it's a great idea to have an internship program, but let's talk about how can we make it successful? What can we do to optimize the ability for this program to be successful? So first of all, kind of nuts and bolts, it's really important to prepare when you're thinking about an internship program or you're expanding an internship program. It's going to be really important to prepare. So having the appropriate supervisor placement. This for some people can be, they think of it as a barrier to a program, meaning that I don't have the appropriate person in place. So this does not translate to someone who needs to literally be with that individual all day long. We will talk about that later. That's more of a job coach. But this is just making sure that you have someone who's going to provide for open feedback. Knowledge of how to best use interns. So it is not, an internship is often, unless you have a very robust internship program that's been going for decades, an internship is often work that is carved out. It's almost like job creation. Once you start doing it, it's very easy. But understanding what do you need to do to make sure that the intern has the appropriate amount of work and that you're getting a value benefit back for that. Obviously, Disability 101 understanding. We we are focused on non-apparent disabilities, but there's all kinds of other disabilities that you would want to make sure that you at least understand, so that if someone is asking for an accommodation and you are prepped for that, but also so you're creating an environment that is going to be conducive to successful working. Knowing what you can and cannot ask. I'm a believer in having a buddy or mentor if you have the capacity at your job site to have someone. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone with a disability or even someone with a similar disability. In our program, we embed the mentorship, but a lot of internships are most successful if there's someone that young, fresh intern can go to as a first line of defense before, so they don't feel like they're bothering their supervisor all the time. Obviously, getting back to knowledge of what's best, we want to make sure that we have appropriate accommodations in place, and I'm sure you guys have resources around that. Obviously, the Job Accommodation Network, askjan.org, you can literally type in any disability and it will pop out what are appropriate accommodations. The second area that I think is critical is communication. So most of the reasons that internship programs are successful is because there is robust communication. Most of the reasons internship programs are not successful is because there is a poor communication system in place. So if you have a placement or supporting agency that is vetting interns for you or placing interns with you, having robust communication with that placement or supporting agency on what you're looking for, on what you want to know, on what you don't know is critical. Obviously, communication with interns is critical, and that seems obvious, but we can have interns go through a whole summer who have not actually had input on an ongoing basis as to what they're doing well and where they need continued support. And making sure, especially with young talent coming up, they really want it to be a collaborative experience. So they really want the opportunity, whether it's disability related or not, to be able to talk to you about what do they need to be successful in the workplace, what would help them be successful. And if we can open up that communication, we're going to have much more successful results. I think the idea of being open to this 360-degree mentoring, so knowing that an internship legally is part of it is for the benefit of the intern, obviously to learn about your industry, to learn about the job. But also, we find that it's just as much a learning experience for managers or other people in the workforce to learn from the interns. And so if you can be quite direct about that's one of your outcomes and that's what you're looking to do, I think it will end up being a lot more successful. So how are we going to best prepare for an internship with someone with learning disabilities or ADHD? Much like we would prepare for any other internship, and I don't know who or who not is familiar with this concept of universal design, but I'm just going to talk about it quickly in case you're not. So universal design is a concept that's very applicable in the educational system, but also in the workforce. The idea is that we create something for someone with a disability or someone has a challenge, and in creating that, it makes it better for everyone else. So some of the classic examples that come up are curb cuts, right? So curb cuts were originally created for wheelchair users, but in fact, curb cuts are, accessible for people with strollers, for people on bikes, for everyone. The one I like in particular, because I have a daughter who is deaf, is baseball signs. So those were first created for a baseball player who was deaf, but obviously they are used all the time now. Same thing for text messaging. That was theoretically, it was originally created for people who were deaf, and we know how much we depend on text messaging at this time. So creating an environment that is helpful for people with learning disabilities and ADHD is going to help anyone, any young intern in your program. So what do those accommodations look like? They are almost always very inexpensive and most commonly used as natural supports. It used to, in fact, be the case that people who have severe dyslexia, who need some speech-to-text or text-to-speech software, you used to have to get separate software. It's now, ubiquitous on that. What are some of the strategies for success? So we talked about frequent and clear communication and feedback. This is particularly true for individuals with non-apparent disabilities. There's often communication problems where these individuals, either they may be reticent to speak up, to ask, or there literally may be a processing issue around communication. So making that at the forefront of what we're doing and making sure that the employees knows what's expected and when, especially in the beginning. You would obviously want to get to a point where we're building up the self-advocacy abilities of the young person so that they are coming to you. But in the beginning, we want to make sure everything is really clear, everything is written and given verbally. We find people with ADHD really do well with time management sheets and task lists. And that gets back to one of my earlier slides talking about the collaborative conversation. So not presenting them with, this is what we want you to do, but asking them that we have these tools. What tools do you find helpful? And then working together to find out a time management and task management system that's going to work both for your organization, but also for the young people that we're serving. And then it very well can be that you need to provide the reasonable accommodation of additional training time. That can mean training taking longer. It can mean possibly training not literally twice on something, but one time it's the big picture and one time you're going over the smaller details for new tasks. Also for completion of tasks. So if someone traditionally has received extra time in an educational setting and this is their first time in an internship, providing extra time or asking if they need it is something that is going to be really helpful in making sure that they're finishing tasks on time. Assistive technology, obviously, in accessible workplaces. Assistive technology has gotten easier and easier to acquire, and that's a conversation, and the young person is they should be coming to you asking for it, but we want to create an environment where they feel comfortable asking for it. Accessible workspaces often means for someone who has ADHD, literally the ability to get up and take breaks and not be frowned upon for doing so. And so once again, that gets back to the idea of universal design. These are all things that are going to help everyone. Supportive supervisor and mentor. So we often hear from people who have mental health challenges in the form of anxiety that one of the most important things for them is feedback. And one of the most unnerving or anxiety-provoking things for them is when they don't receive feedback. So having supportive people around them who are going to give feedback in a positive way. So we're all trying to get to the place of having it be a successful internship, but setting that up. I also want to talk for a minute about the fact that some interns will have job coaches. And I don't want to be pedantic if you all know what job coaches are, but just to give you a brief overview for those of you who may not know. So a job coach can support someone in the workplace to be at the same level as their typically developing peers that they might not have access to without a job coach. So a job coach is someone, it can range. A job coach can be someone who it comes in once a week, comes in twice a week. It could be someone in the beginning who's, actually shadowing the person and sitting next to them. But the goal of a job coach is to support the employer to make sure this is a successful internship or employment. And then it's obviously also to help the intern on their end. So job coaches are usually, 99% of the time provided through some sort of vocational rehab service. So it's someone who would be in touch with you and coordinating with you and would not just be showing up at work. But these job coaches can be privately contracted for as well. So I wanted to just provide you guys an opportunity to hear from some of the accommodations. We can talk about what accommodations we think are great, but we've actually polled the interns that we serve and asked them what are the most important accommodations from their perspective. And so I'm just literally, these aren't well, these are sort of ordered in priority, but they're all the top areas, so they're all equally important. So the first is one I've already talked about, the ability to take breaks. And this does not mean that you're taking breaks all the time and your workday is shortened. You're still getting the work done. And if you're a person who really needs to take a longer break, then that is just, that may be a situation where it's increasing your workday. Flexibility with hours. Those folks who have mental health issues often need days where they need to work from home. We also have people with executive functioning disorder who may need to start earlier or later in the day, and this is something they have found exceedingly helpful. Opportunity to ask clarifying questions. So that seems like an obvious one, but that's one of the areas where the kind of intern-employer relationship seems to break down the most. And I'll just be really transparent as to why. So if you have a young person who has a diagnosed learning disability, we know that a learning disability, if you do not know, it means that there is a spread in your IQ scores, meaning that you have an over 30-point spread between your kind of cognitive acquisition abilities and your processing in a really general sense. So if someone says, I have a learning disability, and they come to you and explain, I might need to ask clarifying questions, the feedback we get is people are going to think they're dumb if they ask clarifying questions. So how do we set it up to make sure that doesn't happen? We create an environment where they know, no question, we want you to ask questions up front. We want to create an environment where you get it right, and so we'd much rather have you ask questions now. It seems like such an obvious point, but it's the one where the system seems to break down the most. This is connected with the next statement, which is accessible way to make sure that interns are able to contact a supervisor without feeling like a bother. So, I myself have had interns, and when you have a busy day, you don't want someone coming to you with a bunch of questions all the time. So there's all kinds of ways to do that, to set a time of day when all the questions are sort of put together. If you have a system of email only, or you have a system of meeting in the morning, whatever the system is, creating that accessible way and being really explicit about how you want it used and why you want it used. Another accommodation that we've heard back from interns is often young people who have the executive functioning disorder, they may be thinking too much, actually, and so it's an inability to start a project. These are bright young people we want in our workforce, but they literally just might need a way to get things out of their head and on paper, and that's something that they themselves have articulated as a accommodation that's helpful. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what are the possible challenges and solutions that can happen if we start an internship program. First of all, I'm sure, as you are aware, not all interns want to disclose, and this is particularly true for people with non-apparent disabilities. They often think if they say they have a learning disability or ADHD, people are going to think they're dumb or hyper. They may not realize they need an accommodation. So we're going to talk about that in solutions, but that often happens. The idea of I needed accommodations in school, I don't need them in the workplace. The concern that they're not going to be viewed equally. They're not going to be viewed as John Smith. They're going to be viewed as John Smith, the person with the learning disability. We've talked about this. People are going to think they're not smart. All these challenges that I'm talking to you guys about are coming directly from the people who are interns with these disabilities. So this is true. No pity. They want to be treated equally. They don't want to either be denied an assignment or given an assignment simply because they have a disability. It could very well be that the young person does not want to disclose because they don't have the impression that the employer is inclusive. We see this even with employers who perceive themselves to be incredibly inclusive. The young people don't perceive it that way, especially if this is a first-time job. There's also the issue around self-ID, which I don't want to do a huge thing on self-ID versus self-disclosure because that could be a whole nother hour. But, you know, the idea that they are just self-IDing for whatever forms you need if you're a federal contractor or if you're tracking who has disability. I have uniformly found that young people have no idea why that is helpful and why should they do it. They don't see what is in it for them. They don't see what the benefit is. So that can be a problem as well. Interns not really knowing what accommodations might be helpful. So they might know they need accommodations, and they very well could come to you and say, I have ADHD, I have LD, I have anxiety, I have autism, but they really don't know what that means. They just know they're supposed to ask for an accommodation, which leaves you in an awkward position because you're not sure what to get them. And so employers may feel that they're unprepared to ensure success. So let's take a minute to talk about what some of the solutions or some of the solutions would be to these problems. So how do we deal with disclosure? You create an inclusive environment. How do you do that? I think you repeat, you repeat, you repeat. So most importantly, putting any disability hiring initiatives on your website and making them easy to find. I'm particularly sensitive to this. If you think about, if you are recruiting interns from colleges and universities, 90%, and these are individuals with disabilities, 90% of those individuals have a disability that's non-apparent. And I would say about 70% of them, it's around, one of the disabilities is around executive functioning, meaning ADHD. So if it's not easy to find and it's not blatant that you have an initiative to hire people with disabilities, they're not going to find it. If it's 5 clicks away, you will have lost them at click 2 or click 3. They like storytelling, so highlighting employees with disabilities. Let's hear from the people themselves. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone with the same disability, but let's have that be visible and forefront and inspiring. The third one seems obvious, but often young people are not aware that being upfront and open about alternative application processes and interviewing options for individuals with disabilities. I realize when you're vetting a lot of people that may be hard to do, but you're going to miss out on a lot of talent if we don't provide, especially for our candidates on the autism spectrum, they prefer kind of meetup groups as opposed to like a one-on-one interviewing situation. Alternative application process, sometimes it's not going to work just doing the computer generated application that's going to X them out right away. So I would encourage you to think about other ways that you can be helpful on that. Some of the other solutions are around when we're talking about how do we help interns know what accommodations they need. One kind of obvious way is if you are focused on universal design, your accommodations are probably already going to be in place or you are working towards that. So if you are thinking about what works for the young people with disabilities is usually the best for everyone, that's going to be the best way to have the accommodations already set up. So it's kind of that continual and intentional focus on how do we make a workplace better for everyone. In so doing, you may be in a situation where you don't even need to have the discussion around accommodations because the workplace is already so accommodating. To help young people understand what accommodations they need, provide mentorship. As I've said before, this does not have to necessarily be an individual with a disability. It would have to be someone who understands what it takes to be successful in the workplace. And then engage in a reflective process and experiment. So I think sometimes challenges come up because we're too scared to try something and too scared to have an open conversation. I think it's fine to say, we understand you're having a problem meeting deadlines. What do we think would help? Let's try this. Let's come back and reflect on this and, after 2 more assignments and see where we are and then experiment. But be really upfront that that's what we're doing. How do we help employers feel prepared? So I think kind of dovetailing off what I was just talking about, I think be really transparent. If some of the people on this call are employers who have it all going on. They know exactly how to do this. Great. You can be great leaders for the rest of us. If this is a goal and you are trying to recruit a lot of talent with disabilities and you're trying to create a workplace that's accommodating for interns to feel successful, be transparent that this is a work in progress. You need the interns' help. You want the feedback. Ask the young people questions. So we often find that an employer has a concern about one of the interns and their ability, either their ability to do something or where they may not be speaking up, or how to even accommodate or make the internship successful, but they haven't actually sat down and talked to that young person about what do you think would help. In that same vein, let's ask for feedback, right? Let's include employees in this process. I'm just going to speak on a personal issue. I had a young woman working for me who had pretty severe anxiety, and she came to me and said, I have really pretty severe anxiety. I'm not sure how I'm going to get through this job. And I had no idea how to handle that because I didn't know what she was talking about. It was so general. And so we went through a process of trying something, asking for feedback, trying something else, asking for feedback. And then obviously consult the expert. So you have a great expert in getting hired. There's lots of experts out there who can help you if you feel that you are ready to do this, but you don't know how and you really want to get it right. So I am going to turn this back to Sarah because I want to see if you guys have any questions. And I want to try to answer all your questions today. However, if there is something that I cannot answer, I will just get back to you on it, I promise.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much, Carolyn. I do have a couple questions and a couple comments just to reiterate the great information that you shared today. I think something that we've discussed, just to drive the point home, is that this is a great opportunity, and when I say this, I mean internships are a great opportunity for organizations to make a good first impression as well. It's not just for the intern to show up, as we often give advice to interns to say, sell yourself, tell them why you're of value to the organization, tell them why you should be hired and keep you in the pipeline. This is also an opportunity as the organization to make that same sell to the intern or to the person who's participating in the internship, to give them an idea of the inclusive workplace that you have, that it is in fact a healthy work environment. A lot of the things that we've received feedback on from job seekers and what they're looking for in a work environment and to feel comfortable to self-disclose are the same things that anybody without a disability are looking for as well. Again, like having a healthy work environment, is it just this high-paced, high-stress job all of the time? Is there some of that work-life balance available? What benefits are there? Is there any telecommute or work-from-home opportunities or flexible work schedules? Certain things that we've all talked about together are just some of the things that I wanted to reiterate again. So Carolyn, I know that Getting Hired, we came to speak to some of your interns and reiterating the best practices that you have for increasing self-disclosure, because whether you have an intern or mentorship program specifically for people with disabilities, you have people with disabilities throughout your organization right now. Again, over 70% of disabilities are non-apparent, so you could just have an internship even for veterans, let's say, or for women in STEM. I know that's a really big program right now. That's not to say that anyone in those groups do not have a disability as well and just haven't felt comfortable to self-disclose. All of those diversity groups intersect. So feedback that we received directly from the group of interns that we spoke to is, again, that piece of culture. Is there representation of people with disabilities within the organization right now? Tell me their stories if that's something that you have information on. Put yourself in the shoes of a job seeker. What would you want to see? Are you seeing opportunities like employee resource groups that you could participate in? Are you receiving messages of inclusion from the start about an accommodation process just in case somebody needs to request an accommodation? Are you receiving messages of accessibility, physical accessibility of the building, and making sure that there are ramps for anybody who might be using a wheelchair or any other mobility assistive device, and all documents, whether that's electronic, PDF, Excel, anything like that, are those all accessible as well? So Carolyn, just reiterating those points, I wanted to ask you, is there any other feedback that you can think of when I mention that that comes to mind from your interns that you've seen over the years on really what they're looking for, and even if you've already mentioned it, but to reiterate?
I think that, you know, we, at least in the area I'm involved with, the non-apparent disabilities, we obviously do a lot around diversity includes disability, because we feel that people who think differently bring different ideas to the table, and employers are looking for diverse workforces. They want innovative solutions, and the young people really, for the most part, don't believe that. They just don't believe that you would be looking for a young person who thinks differently, and they are concerned that the idea that things might take them longer, or that they need to approach something from a different perspective, that the modern workforce doesn't have the time or desire to accommodate that in order to get a better result. So I think the more we can focus on, in fact, having 5 people at the table who have 5 different ideas gets us to a better solution, is helpful, because my sample pool, and when we interface with young people, they don't actually believe that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, I think that's a great point and a great way to message that, and that's, I think, a bit of the subtle way to say, here's why we value diversity in general and as a whole, but especially for people with non-apparent disabilities, it is something that, again, it comes back down to the branding, the marketing. What are you doing to message yourselves as being an inclusive organization, and addressing that why up front? Why are you interested in hiring people with disabilities? More than just saying we're committed to and we want to, but why are you interested in that? So even looking at all of your social media channels, your website, to your point, Carolyn, of even if you have a designated page talking about the inclusion of people with disabilities within the website, one thing that we asked a number of job seekers is, would you know to look for a designated diversity and inclusion page on a website or within a careers page, or where would you turn to for that information? And they said, I would just look on the regular careers page. I wouldn't think to have to click within a page of a page and look for something talking about differences in diversity to be listed under diversity and inclusion. It should just be the people, right? And it's a great point of put it in people's faces as much as possible and make that consistent. And if you think you are messaging it, it can probably be messaged even more, and again and again and again. So that's something that I know we're happy to work with all of our employer partners on, is that messaging piece to make sure that it is consistent and it is strong. But feedback that we received from Carolyn, your interns, when we went to speak to them as well, which is invaluable.
Yeah, I think that there's an idea around being focused, if you can be focused on end product and not the process. So both if someone's coming to something because they think differently, another thing that goes with that I was just thinking about is those interns who may have social challenges, right? So they're communicating in a way that we don't think of as typical per se, but their end product is exactly what you want. So they will tell you that they feel that they're being judged by how they're doing something, not what they're doing. And particularly people with an autism diagnosis feel strongly about that we need to be focused much more on what is the end product, not how did you get there. So if that means someone has to get up and pace around, or someone needs to be in a quiet room when they're doing their thinking part, or just the opposite, someone needs to be in a louder room. Why do we care if that's outside the norm, if the end product is exactly what we want? And so if there's a way to convey that early on, I think that would go a long way to presenting yourselves as being inclusive.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. So backing it up a step, one of the questions that we received is, for those who do not currently have an internship program in place and they're interested in starting one, especially for individuals with disabilities or learning disabilities, who within the organization would you suggest that they connect with? Do you think that in order to start an internship program, they should connect with leadership and it should be a top-down initiative, or it's something that could in fact start from the bottom up or potentially even stem from an employee resource group if that currently exists for people with disabilities, or a little bit of all the above?
So I'll give you my ideal. We work with over 50 employers for internship programs, and it's every possible scenario you can imagine. Obviously, the ideal is you want buy-in from the C-suite and the managers. The problem if you just have buy-in from the C-suite is that you have someone saying, this is an initiative for our organization, and then you have the people implementing it who have no idea what you're talking about. And I find that's actually where we run into some of the biggest barriers. So I love this idea of it coming out of the employee resource group, or even coming out of a supervisor or even HR, and then bringing it to the C-suite. The problem is if you're a large organization and you want to do it, you want it to be across the board, you don't want to just pilot it in one office, you're not going to get buy-in without the C-suite. So how do you do that? I think if it's going to come out of an employee resource group or come out of one department or come out of HR, you've got to be able to demonstrate that this is not just the one person, right? This is not just one person's initiative. This has got widespread support. So to me, that would be the ideal, but it really depends. If you're a small organization, it may be just one department, right? But if you're a larger organization, I think you really need both parts in order for it to be successful, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful. And another question that we received is, do you have an example of a company that comes to mind who has a really great internship program in the sense that they've implemented some of these best practices that you've talked about, or better yet, they have their internship program for people with disabilities and resources for people with disabilities listed on their website that those who are on the line could take a look at as an example?
That's a good question about whether people have it listed on the website. We used to have something called the Washington Internship, I even forgot what it was, working group, and that was a list of a bunch of different internship programs, and I don't know which one of them had it listed on the website, but I will get back to you on that. As far as programs that have, where it's kind of been seamless, I would say that we have two that are pretty seamless and are able to implement this easily. And I'm also happy, as long as I get their permission, I'm happy to refer any of you to some of the managers that we work with to talk about it. But one of them is the American Psychological Association. I use them as an example because they have about 10 different departments, and our internship initiative goes wide to all of them. Right, and so they are able to implement the accommodations we need, but in a variety, from like an IT to an HR to a marketing to a finance department. They have a commitment to it that actually that one started at HR, went up to the C-suite, and then came back down to the kind of program directorate. The other one I would say is the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian runs on interns. So they know how to run on interns, but they had an initiative that was on their website, I don't think it is anymore though, to have interns with disabilities. And they actually had a dedicated person to that initiative who then we would interface with. And once again, I'm giving that as an example because it shows the ability for this model to work in a bunch of different departments. So every single one of the museums had the initiative, if that makes sense. I will get back. I would like to, I would like to get back to whoever asked the question through Sarah on where, who has it front and center on their website. Because where I was coming to you guys from that is that it's a problem for our guys when they're trying to access things because they can't find it. So your question is, who does it right? And I don't have that off the top of my head because I haven't seen it, other than when the Smithsonian had it. But so I will get back to you on that.
Sure, not a problem. Another question that we had is, you had mentioned earlier EQ versus IQ and that Google is looking more into this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on how EQ is assessed and measured during the recruitment process, if you have any insight into it? I know a lot of times it's really centered around behavioral questions and questions that you ask people that have them reflect back on their emotion or their behavior, and if you were feeling negatively, how did that impact your performance, something like that. But was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
That's a great question. I am going to elaborate it on specifically for individuals with disabilities, because I otherwise wouldn't know how to answer the question. So I first want to say that the idea, I feel pretty strongly that the group we're talking about, given that this is an area for growth, right? For all young workers, the EQ is an area for growth, but particularly those who have the challenges that we have been talking about. So you would not want it to be a part of the admissions process to become an intern, because I think it could be a barrier, right? The whole point is that you're trying to create an environment where they can grow in this, because you need it as a business. You need workers who have good IQ, and you need to help grow these young workers to have EQ. So I would not want it to be part of the initial admissions piece, but I will tell you what we do. So because we want to track it. So in our program, we track this from before they started our program, and then after they're put in our training and with our internships, how is it after our program? And so we basically have psychometric tools that looks at, what is their hope? Two questions, which is really like, what is the young person's hope for their future? Do they feel they have control over their future? That's kind of the very database part of it. And then we measure it after the program and see if that increased. And then we're looking at their communication skills, right? So the best way to measure EQ is, how is someone communicating, and are they able to take the perspective of someone else? I personally don't think there is one test to do it. I think the best way to do it is you're highly targeted, and when you're assessing this person, let's say you have an internship program, you're assessing them on a weekly basis as to how they are performing on the job. Part of that performance is tracked with EQ, and that's what we do. So you're looking at, how are they communicating? Are they able to take the perspective of others? Are they able to work as a team? And just some obvious examples of that is, if someone is in fact, coming constantly to their supervisor's office and interrupting them, right? That's just a classic example. That person's having pretty low EQ, right? And then you're looking at, what can we put in place to help this person get to where they need to get to, because this skill is so important. So I would not want to see, I think if you have a hiring initiative for people that don't have these challenges, that's great. But if you have a hiring initiative for people for whom this is something they need to work on, that's why internships are so important. And I would want to see it as part of the progress and evaluation of the intern as they're kind of progressing. But you also could do what we do, and you measure it before and you measure it afterwards, and then that looks great for your organization to be able to say, these interns who go through our program, not only do they get the skills on XYZ, but we found they improve their EQ, their power skills, their soft skills, however you want to say it, and we've measured it.
That's a great answer and great insight into what you do at BroadFutures. The last question that we have is regarding job coaches. So I know you briefly touched on this, and job coaches can be provided by vocational rehab offices. Have you seen organizations provide their own internal job coaches as well, like training employees who go through disability etiquette training and accommodations and accessibility to have a full understanding, even for the role that the intern or that a new employee might be moving into, and how they might need to be accommodated, for example?
So and I'm just going to use the example of the Smithsonian. So yeah, they did have a dedicated person who actually, that was part of her role, was to do exactly what you're talking about. So it's not a job coach through Voc Rehab, because, not to get too in the weeds, a lot of only a certain segment of the population is legally eligible for a job coach, meaning they couldn't do the work without it, as opposed to you're trying to create an optimal environment. So the Smithsonian has a dedicated person who would actually do that and came to know what each of the positions was and was highly trained in disability etiquette, and would talk with each of the departments, as would we, but she would do it for interns who weren't a part of our program. So yes, absolutely, that can, I mean, if you have the resources and you have that staff person, and that can look different, right? So that can be a initial just getting the person onboarded, or that can be that kind of mentor person I was talking about where they're actually more present. We have had, for some of the smaller organizations we work with, we've had some supervisors who want to be that role. We don't want to require employers to do that because we try to help with that, but it also can just be an embedded, certain departments have a supervisor who that's part of their position as opposed to having a dedicated person.
And I think that's a great point, and exactly what I was thinking and what we've seen some of our own employers do in the sense of having employees trained. And when we talk about preparation, resources, best practices overall for a great experience, disability or not, it's having somebody who understands these new roles that people are moving into, and then giving that perspective of, hey, is there a potential accommodation that could be asked for or needed, just preparing proactively as much as possible. Is this fully accessible in terms of what they're doing, or if they're working with technology, do we have accessible tools or functionality? Is there anything else that we need to keep in mind to make sure that this person is really set up for success, and again, proactively preparing as much as possible? So I think that's a great example that you gave. At this time, I think that is all that we have today in terms of content and questions. I'm happy to give everybody a couple minutes back to their day. And Carolyn, I wanted to thank you again for all this great information and the content and partnership together. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I did see just a couple slip in that I think will take more than the allotted time we have left, so I will reach out to you directly. But otherwise, I wanted to thank you, Carolyn, and thank you everybody who attended.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope it was helpful for everyone, and happy to follow up questions are fine.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.